Let's talk about the draft. Where do the Cardinals go with pick 16? Is there a certain guy they should be looking at, a certain position, or is this just kind of a best guy available at this point? What are your
The
thoughts on the
fun thing
draft?
is, like, every general manager, every coach will just say they're going to take the best guy available, right?
Mhm.
The best player on the board. That's what they all say. You'll never hear a coach say or a GM say, "We took this guy because we were desperate to fill that position." It's always going to be, "This was
Yeah.
number one on our board," and it's a combination of all that, right? It's the best player available at a position of need, and like we were talking, the Cardinals, they have some needs. You could go for more defense, right? You could go into the secondary. There's at number 16 where they're picking. It's hard to say who's going to be there. But someone like Jelon Walker from Georgia's there, maybe, right? Kenneth Grant from Michigan, defensive lineman. Like, there's not a lot of players who I think they would pass on if they're good in there. But, are there positions they won't take if it's there? Probably wide receiver. I don't imagine they
Mhm.
would take a quarterback at number 16 either. I don't think they're going to take a tight end if one of them is there. But I would imagine they're going to focus more on the defense unless someone just falls to them. But there's always the opportunity to trade back too if someone does fall to them. If one of the top offensive players, if one of the receivers was to be there at 16, Austin Ford has shown in the past he's willing to trade down and accumulate more picks if there's someone else he's targeting. So I think the Cardinals are in that interesting spot where there's not, like, a year ago, it was pretty much Marvin Harrison Jr. It was either that or they're going
Yes.
to try to get one of the quarterbacks, and they were clearly never going to get one of the quarterbacks. So it's like, hey, if Marvin Harrison Jr. is there at 4, they're taking him. I guess you could look back and say, hey, Neighbors would have been a good pick too, or Brian Thomas. They're good receivers, but that was a pretty easy call. Get Kyler Murray a true number 1 receiver. This season, it's not like that. And then when you're picking number 16, you're also not at the top of the list for some of those skill guys. So I wouldn't be shocked if they go defense again along the defensive line, maybe a linebacker, but it could be just, when I say the best available defensive player, right? And
Mm.
again, that goes back to, well, do they value a corner more? Maybe they want a safety. Do they want a linebacker, a defensive lineman? Do they want someone to stuff the run? Do they want an edge rusher? That all depends on just what they feel like their roster looks like. And some of the guys like BJ Ujulari, if he's the pass rusher they think he is from a couple years ago in the draft, then maybe you don't need as much of that at the linebacker spot at the edge. So I think they're in a good spot at pick number 16 because there's going to be some talented players there, but they're not in a position where they have to go get X player or Y player. They can
Mhm.
kind of sit back there if they want and find someone who can contribute.
To me, it feels like there's no immediate glaring holes on the team, which has to be really nice going into the draft process. Do you see them making any moves on draft day? Like, would you be trading up, down, trying to get extra picks here?
I think there's always room to get extra picks, but when you're the Cardinals, it's I would say a couple years ago when they were picking at the top of the draft and they made the trade with Houston. Will Anderson went to Houston. The Cardinals ended up
Mhm.
taking Paris Johnson a couple of picks later. That was the first year of Jonathan Gann, the first year of Monty Austin-Ford, and they're trying to rebuild a roster, a culture, everything. So it makes sense to trade down, just accumulate picks because you want to get your guys in there, players that you believe in. A couple years later, they're kind of in a, I don't think there's a make or break season for this regime, but they definitely feel like they need to make the playoffs. And the
Yep.
NFC West isn't easy. But yeah, year 3, you don't necessarily have the luxury to say, let's just accumulate picks and for next season, right? Or for guys who
Right.
are going to help us in 2 or 3 years. So it's a little bit different place for them to be. But I could see a world where they drop down a few spots, maybe if there's someone that they like that falls, or someone that someone else really, really likes that falls, because
Mhm.
when you don't need any one player. Now, if there might be a player that they're just in love with who's like, whoa, that guy's at 16. All right, let's do it. Or there's that, maybe that guy slips to like 12 or 13. It's like, all right, package a 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick to move up a couple of spots and go get your guy. Sure, that could happen. But I think Arizona is definitely in that spot where they have a lot of different options. And there's nothing that
Mm.
they're going to have to do. There's not a player that they have to get or a player they can't miss on. Where at 16, you kind of see how the draft board shakes out, see what happens in front of you, see what kind of moves are made, because everybody does their mock drafts and it's never like that, right? We can all pick a few
Never
players.
ever.
Yeah. Like we can pick a few players to a few teams within like the first 5 or 6, but after that's like, okay, you don't know
Yeah.
what's going to happen. And there's always a pick that surprises people. There's always teams that trade up that you weren't expecting. And the Cardinals could be one of those teams with extra draft picks and not any glaring weaknesses or glaring holes to fill. They could easily be a team that just is content to sit back at 16 and just take literally the best player available, caveat, at a position they could use help at.
Is there anyone that you have your eye on that you would love to see on that team? Maybe a later round guy that not everybody's talking about?
I know locally everyone's talking about Cam Scadaboo, the running back from
I've
Arizona
heard that
State.
too.
Yeah, there's a lot of Arizona fans who want to see him in Cardinal red, and it makes sense. He's a local hero, did great for the Sun
Mhm.
Devils, and is a really good player. The question is, of course, when you have players like that, who it's not a need. You have James Conner, you have Trey Benson, you have a pretty good running back room. You're not drafting a guy like Scadaboo to be a big contributor this year. So are you taking him in the third round? Is he lasting to the fourth or the fifth round? So that's someone who a lot of people out here would really like to see. But there's not anyone in particular that I'm looking at say, oh, I'd love for them to get this player,
Mm.
because it seems like some of their best draft picks over the course of just history, even like 10, 15 years, were players that you may not have even thought of. Players, I mean, Tyrann Mathieu from back in 2013, he was a big name, but no one ever said, oh, they got to get Tyrann Mathieu. That would be great in
Yeah.
the third round. And it turned out to be one of the best picks they had. Or David Johnson, a year later, 2 years later in the third round, I think out of like North Dakota or Northern Iowa or something like that. He was some small school. So
Mhm.
some of their best players just end up being guys that you weren't even thinking about or projecting. Trey McBride just a few years ago. There's like a second round pick on a Colorado State tight end. What are they doing? And he's now one of the best tight
Safe to
ends
say that
in
turned out. Yeah.
yeah, that worked out pretty well. And so
Yeah.
it's I've never been one of those people who really says, "Oh, they got to get this guy if they miss on this
Mhm.
player," because granted, teams make mistakes. There's always busts, there's always misses, there's always players who fall a lot later than they should have gone, throughout history. That's just it's not a science drafting. But I do like to think that the people who are doing the scouting and who are doing all of that know a little bit more about not only their roster's needs, but just these players in general. I watch a lot of college football. I don't watch all of college football, and I certainly don't break down film like these guys probably do. I would hope they
Mhm.
do. So,
Yeah.
you know, so like Austin Ford and his staff, they've done a pretty good job on the draft so far. They've had a decent record over the last couple of seasons. They're just finding players who can contribute, injuries notwithstanding. So I feel if you're a Cardinals fan, you should be pretty confident that they're going to find some players that can contribute to them. But again, it's not like they need people to step in right away and be that player. They don't need necessarily rookies to come in and be impact guys at certain positions. But if they can upgrade their depth and get players who can contribute this season, next year, a handful of snaps a game, then that's going to be a good draft haul. So yeah, Arizona fans would love to see Cam Scadaboo. That's a name that, I mean, when he gets drafted by whoever drafts him, the highlight reels are going to be a lot of fun. It's just be
Yes.
him running guys over and just being like, this guy is just a monster on the field. And yeah, he could help a lot of teams. He could help the Cardinals. But at what round are you taking him? At what round are you
Mm.
taking your third running back when maybe you'd rather have a second corner or a third defensive lineman or on the offensive line where places you can always use help. So there's a lot of good players out there. The beauty of being at 16, the beauty of not needing to trade up to get a certain guy and mortgage 3 picks, 4 picks to do that is you have options. So the Cardinals, if they do trade back, maybe they do land an extra third round pick and take someone like Scadaboo, maybe slightly earlier than they would normally because, hey, they have the picks and they really like him. But there's going to be players that they find that they're going to be pretty excited about and can already tell you the press conference afterwards that they love this guy, was the top of their draft board in
Yeah.
every round. It's like in college when they're like, the recruiting, like, oh, we got all the players we wanted. We love all these. Like, yeah, sure. You got players that were there for you. And yeah, you don't have the top pick. You don't get the absolute best player in the draft, but you're going to find players who you feel good about joining your roster. And for the Cardinals, like we were saying earlier, this is a roster that kind of feels like it needs to make the playoffs next season.
Mhm.
So maybe they go more veteran guys. And I say veterans, guys who were seniors, fifth year seniors who are more developed instead of projects, and just find people who they do think who in the later rounds could contribute this season because this is a team that has eyes on the playoffs going forward.
Thanks for watching this episode on the BetCanada channel. Hit that subscribe button because I've got more Cardinals content coming with Adam that you do not want to miss.